Terry Pratchett's The Hogfather. I thought, considering it being the Christmas season, I would begin with reading one of my favourite sort of Christmassy books. And I would just do it sort of like an audiobook sort of thing, but more visual, I suppose. And so, I will read a personal favourite of mine for you to enjoy, and I will read the whole thing, not abridged. I'm not abridging it. The whole thing, unabridged, for you at home to enjoy whenever and wherever you like. Begin. Everything starts somewhere. Although many physicists disagree, but others have always been dimly aware of the problem at the start of things. They wonder aloud how the snowplow driver gets to work, or how the makers of dictionaries look up the spelling of the words. Yet there is the constant desire to find some point in the twisting, knotting, raveling nets of time-space on which a metaphorical finger can be put to indicate that here is the point where it all began. Something began when the Guild of Assassins enrolled Mr. Teotomi, who saw things differently from other people. And one of the ways that he saw things differently from other people was that in seeing other people as things. Later, Lord Downey of the Guild said, "We took pity on him because he'd lost both parents at an early age. I think that on reflection we should have wondered a bit more about that." But it was much earlier even than that, when most people forgot that the very oldest stories are, sooner or later, about blood. Later on they took the blood out to make the stories more acceptable to children, or at least to the people who had read them to children, rather than the children themselves, who, on the whole, are quite keen on blood, provided it's being shed by the deserving. That is to say, those who deserve to shed blood, or possibly not. You never quite know with some kids. And then wondered where all the stories went. Earlier still, when something in the darkness of the deepest caves and the gloomiest forest thought, "What are they, these creatures? I will observe them." And much, much earlier than that, when the Discworld was formed, drifting onwards through space atop 4 elephants on the shell of the giant turtle, Great Ape Tuin. Possibly as it moves, it gets tangled like a blind man in a cobweb house, in those highly specialized little space-time strands that try to breed in every history they encounter, stretching them and breaking them and tucking them into new shapes. Or possibly not, of course. The philosopher Didactylos has summed up an alternative hypothesis. Things just happen. What the hell? The senior wizards of Unseen University stood and looked at the door. There was no doubt that whoever had shut it wanted it to stay shut. Dozens of nails secured it to the doorframe, planks had been nailed right across, and finally it had, up until this morning, been hidden by a bookcase that had been put in front of it.
"Then there's the sign, Ridcully," said Jean. "You have read it, I assume. You know, the sign which says, 'Do not, under any circumstances, open this door.'" "Of course I've read it," said Ridcully. "Why do you think I want it opened?"
Why?" said the lecturer in ancient runes.
"To see why they wanted it shut, of course."
This exchange contains almost all you need to know about human civilization. At least the bits of it that are now under the sea, fenced off, or still smoking. He gestured to Modo, the university's gardener and upjumped dwarf, who was standing by with a crowbar.
"Go to it, lads!"
The gardener saluted.
Right you are, sir.
Against the background of splintering timber, Ridcully went on.
It says on the plans that this was a bathroom. There's nothing frightening about a bathroom, for God's sake. I want a bathroom. I'm fed up with sluicing. Down with you fellows. It's unhygienic. You can catch stuff. My father told me where you get lots of people bathing together, the Baruch gnome is running around with his little sack. Is that like the Tooth Fairy? Said the Dean sarcastically. I'm in charge here. I want a bathroom of my own, said Ridcully firmly. And that's all there is to it, all right? I want a bathroom in time for Hogswatch nights. Understand?
And that's a problem with beginnings, of course. Sometimes when you're dealing with occult realms that have quite a different attitude to time, you get the effect a little way before the cause. From somewhere on the edge of hearing came a glingle, glingle, glingle noise, like little silver bells. And about the same time as the Arch-Chancellor was laying down the law, Susan Stowe-Hellett was sitting up in bed, reading by candlelight. Frost patterns curled across the windows. She enjoyed these early evenings. Once she had put the children to bed, she was more or less left to herself. Mrs. Gator was pathetically scared of giving her any instructions, even though she paid Susan's wages. Not that the wages were important. Of course, what was important was that she was being her own person and holding down a real job. Being a governess was a real job. The only tricky bit had been the embarrassment when her employer found out that she was a duchess, because in Mrs. Gator's book, which was a rather short book with big handwriting, the upper crust wasn't supposed to work, it was supposed to loaf around. It was all Susan could do to stop her curtsying when they met. A flicker made her head turn, made her turn her head. The candle flame was streaming out horizontally, as though in a howling wind. She looked up. The curtains billowed away from the window, which flung itself open with a clatter, but there was no wind. At least, no wind in this world. Images formed in her mind. A red ball, the sharp smell of snow, and then they were gone, and instead there were... "Teeth," said Susan aloud. "Teeth again." She blinked. When she opened her eyes on the window, as she knew it would be, firmly shut, the curtain hung demurely. The candle flame was innocently upright. Oh, not again. Not after all this time. Everything has gone so well. Susie! She looked round. Her door had been pushed open and a small figure stood there, barefoot in a necklace. She sighed. "Yes, Twyla?" "I'm afraid of the monster in the cellar, Susan. It's going to eat me up." Susan shut her book firmly and raised a warning finger. "What have I told you about trying to sound ingratiatingly cute, Twyla?" The little girl said, "You said I mustn't. You said that exaggerated listening is a hanging offence and I only do it to get attention." "Good. Do you know what monster it is this time?" "It's the big hairy one with..." Susan raised the finger. She warned. "With 8 arms. Twyla corrected herself. "What, again?" "All right." She got out of bed and put her dressing gown on, trying to stay quite calm while the child watched her. So they were coming back. Oh, not the monsters in the cellar. That was all her day's work. But it looked as if she was going to start remembering the future again. She shook her head. However far you ran away, you always caught yourself up. But monsters were easy, at least. She'd learned how to deal with monsters. She picked up the poker from the nursery fender and went down the back stairs, with Twyla following her. The Gators were having a dinner party. Muffled voices came from the direction of the dining room. Then, as she crept past, A door opened, and a yellow light spilled out, and a voice said,
"Ye gods! There's a girl in the nightshirt out here with a poker!"
She saw figures silhouetted in the night. She saw figures silhouetted in the light, and made out the worried faces of Mrs. Gator.
"Susan, what are you doing?"
And Susan looked at the poker and then back at the woman. "Twyla says she's afraid of a monster in the cellar, Mrs. Gator."
"And you're going to take it with a poker, eh?"
said one of the guests. There was a strong atmosphere of brandy and cigars. "Yes," said Susan simply.
"Susan Douglas,"
said Mrs. Gator.
"I told you about her."
There was a change in expression on the faces peering out from the dining room. It became a sort of amused respect.
"She beats up monsters with a poker,"
said someone.
"Actually, that's a very clever idea,"
said someone else.
"Little girl gets it in her head there's a monster in the cellar. You go in with the poker and make a few bashing noises while the child listens, and then everything's all right. Good thinking, that girl. Very sensible. Very modern."
"Well, that's what you're doing, Susan," said Mrs. Gator anxiously. "Yes, Mrs. Gator," said Susan obediently.
"This I've got to watch by Io. It's not of every day you see a monster beaten up by a girl,"
said the man behind her. There was a swish of silk and a cloud of cigar smoke as the diners poured out into the hall. Susan sighed and went down to the cellar stairs while Twyla sat demurely at the top, hugging her knees. The door opened and shut. There was a short period of silence, and then a terrifying scream. One woman fainted, and a man dropped his cigar. "You don't have to worry. Everything will be all right," said Twyla calmly. "She always wins. Everything will be all right." There were thuds and clangs, and then a whirling noise, and finally a sort of bubbling. Susan pushed open the door. The poker was bent at right angles. There was a nervous applause.
"Very well done," said the guest. "Very psychological. Clever idea, adapting the poker. And I expect you're not afraid anymore, eh, little girl?"
"No."
"Very psychological."
"Susan says, don't get afraid, get angry," said Twyla.
"Oh, thank you, Susan,"
said Mrs. Gator, now a trembling bouquet of nerves.
"Now, Sir Geoffrey, if we'd all like to come back into the parlour, the drawing room."
The party went back up the hall. The last thing Susan heard before the door shut was,
"Dash convincing. The way she bent the poker like that."
She waited. "Have you gone, Twyla?"
"Yes, Susan."
"Good." Susan went back into the cellar and emerged, towing something large and hairy with 8 legs. She managed to haul it up the steps and down the other passage to the backyard, where she kicked it out. It would evaporate before dawn. Twyla watched carefully. It evaporates before dawn. "That's what we do with monsters," she said. Twyla watched carefully. "Now it's bed for you, my girl," said Susan, picking her up. "Can I have the poker in my room for the night?" "All right." "Only kills monsters, doesn't it?" the child said sleepily as Susan carried her upstairs. "That's right," Susan said. "All kinds." She put the girl to bed next to her brother and leaned the poker against the toy cupboard. The poker was made of some cheap metal with a brass knob on the end. She would, Susan reflected, give quite a lot to be able to use it on the children's previous governess. "Good night." "Good night." She went back to her own small bedroom and got back into bed, watching the curtains suspiciously. It would be nice to think she'd imagined it. It would also be stupid to think that true. But she'd been nearly normal for 2 years now, making her own way in the real world, never remembering the future at all. Perhaps she had just imagined things. Perhaps she had just dreamed things, but even dreams could be real. She tried to ignore the long thread of wax that suggested the candle had just for a few seconds streamed in the wind. And we'll leave it at there for the moment, so I'll come back to this another time where I'll give another reading and we'll move a little bit further on into the book. Okay, till next time.